Welcome to another live stream on Fantasy Armchair Athletes here, folks. Week 3 has officially begun, and the injuries have been piling up a lot over the course of the last 4 to 5 days. It's actually been crazy how many names have gone down, so we're going to do everything we can to jump into those injuries, keep you updated on people who are a coin toss, game time decision, whatever you want to call it. Plug and plays, I love doing those, just letting you know who can you slot into your lineup this week. And then, of course, we'll be answering all of your fantasy football-related questions as the clock kicks down to kickoff tomorrow. Injuries have mostly been at the running back position, but we will cover a variety of people here today. And we'll start with Aaron Jones against the Saints. Aaron Jones is a limited participant in practice, at least as of Thursday, rolling into Friday. He is recovering from a hamstring injury that he suffered or came down with against the Bears in week 1. We saw a report on Underdog saying that Aaron Jones could legitimately be a game time decision. We may not know his status until about 90 minutes before game time. There's also Christian Watson, who is questionable against the Saints. I think that's really going to impact a couple of names around him that we'll cover in a few minutes for sure. But again, just somebody who has been nursing it. It looks like even if he does play, he will be on a pitch count or snap count, if you will. Isaiah Pacheco is questionable against the Bears. Now, this one's pretty big because if he does end up playing, even if it's in a limited capacity, I absolutely love the matchup against a Bears team that has been super poor in all facets of the game, on and off the field, right? Morale is super low. The team is currently a 12-point underdog, and anytime you have a favorite of that significant of an amount in the spread, you're going to love the running back play for sure. So, limited participant late in the late week practices. He's got a hamstring injury as well, does Pacheco. Fantasy Pros reported him as being what looks like a game time decision, but the Bears, again, awesome matchup for him at the moment. They allow the 8th most amount of fantasy points to running backs in a standard PPR format. Joe Burrow against the Rams. Now, this one really sucks because the Bengals and Rams don't play until Monday night. So if you've got a Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, or Kenny Pickett as your backup, you're probably going to have to make a decision early on Sunday. If you're watching this right now, just plug those backups in. At least you know if you make a poor decision or forget to set your lineup, you've got somebody in there who you know is going to play. You don't want to be in a position where you have to plug in Matthew Stafford or Jake Browning, all right? So in terms of who this impacts around Joe Burrow, if he is not good to go, Jake Browning would come in with literally no experience. He took a couple of snaps in week 1 against the Browns, did not complete a pass, has 1 rush for -1 yards, so don't love the move there. I'd say this results in a drop in value for any Bengals receiver and probably pushes the Jamar Chase buy low campaign on for another week, and I am very much on that campaign in case you were wondering. Bryce Young is out against the Seahawks. Now, Young is only owned in like 12% of leagues, but I do mention this one because his backup is Andy Dalton. That may not mean much to most, but I argue that you'll be getting better and even more frequency in passing production from someone who has 166 games under his belt. You'd get a lot more out of him, I'd argue, than somebody who isn't even a month into his NFL career. Even if he is the number 1 overall pick from this year's draft class, he hasn't looked too phenomenal so far. I'd also say a more throw-heavy scheme is in order. Not only is somebody with much more experience, I mean, we're talking 12 years with Andy Dalton under center, but the Panthers are pretty decent underdogs at plus 5.5 against the Seahawks this week. So that's going to warrant a throw-heavy scheme if that game does turn out how the odds makers are predicting it will. Deontay Johnson's on the IR now. This one sucks because I was a huge buy low candidate on him. I still am. I mean, he's not taking up an extra roster spot if you go grab him right now until he's pulled off the IR. I would use this as an opportunity, though, to highlight plug-and-play options. Obviously, the initial instinct is to say that George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth will see an uptick in usage, but I want to highlight someone who has slowly been working his way into this team as an elite pass catcher, and that is Jaylen Warren. And when I say elite pass catcher, I'm mainly referring to deeper league formats, 12, 14, Superflex, you name it. If it's 12 standard PPR, I'm not extremely excited about Jaylen Warren yet, but there is something brewing here. Warren has been in for more than 40% of snaps in the first 2 weeks, and that only happened a couple of times in all of 2022. Mind you, he was healthy as well. He's got the 2nd most targets on the team with 12. We saw him break free for a 30-yard catch and run in that ugly game against the Browns. He's now owned in 60% of leagues. That value has ballooned by almost 20% over the course of the last few days. So there's my segue into remedies, or fill-ins, if you will. Plug and plays, I like to call them. Jaylen Warren is the first one if you can get him. Again, that ownership percentage going off of ESPN Fantasy Football is over a value of 60%. And before I go into these guys, make sure you leave a like, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and most importantly, comment any fantasy football related questions that you have as we roll into week 3's action. That is why I'm here. Any questions you have, start them, sit them, any possible trade scenarios, you want me to rate your lineup, your team, any moves I suggest you may make, maybe you don't know what to do with the team at the moment, drop those in the comment section below, and we will do a deep dive of research for you to give you the absolute best shot possible going into week 3. Let me know your records, point format, the whole 9 yards. Now let's go into the remedies or plug and plays. Chase Reynolds against San Francisco. Only owned in 12.1% of leagues across ESPN Fantasy Football right now. It's going to fluctuate by fantasy application, of course. But Chase Reynolds obviously going to be the complimentary back alongside Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs is somebody who really hasn't had a whole lot of touches so far. That will definitely change as he is slotted as the RB1 for Detroit this week. And David Montgomery was getting those red zone touches for sure. It's basically the Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift dynamic that we saw last year with Detroit. This is not foreign to us at all. Chase Reynolds, again, not owned in too many leagues. Going up against San Francisco, it's not the best matchup in the world, considering that he is not facing San Francisco. That is an error in my notes. But in general, having somebody who's alongside Jahmyr Gibbs, who I would say is still being eased into the lineup, and I wouldn't expect to get 25 to 30 touches, not a bad move at all. It's not somebody I'd plug in and start, per se. Out of my plug and plays, this is probably the one I'm least confident in, just because we don't really know what Chase Reynolds has to offer. But he's not owned in many leagues, and as we know, plenty of running backs. Saquon Barkley, although that game has already passed. Nick Chubb, David Montgomery, and many more are down. This is just somebody to get on your roster and maybe use to establish some trade leverage. Chuba Hubbard is up next against Seattle this week. Owned in just under 20% of leagues. Chuba Hubbard is averaging greater than 6 yards per carry. Now, we talked about the possibility for this Carolina game against Seattle, considering they are 5.5-point underdogs, to have a more throw-heavy scheme, right? You have a veteran under center. You obviously have a team that, was picking first overall for a reason, and it wasn't just because they got a pick from the Bears. They were a projected top 5 overall pick to begin with and knew they wanted to go quarterback. I bring that up because I think there's a significant gap between a team like Carolina and a team like Seattle, who, although they haven't looked great so far, they were still a playoff team in 2022. Chuba Hubbard is averaging greater than 6 yards per carry. One thing I'm trying to say here is I wouldn't expect them to run the ball a whole lot, but you may have a possible takeover at the RB1 spot, or at least somebody who's digging more and more into usage. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard has been in that system longer. Miles Sanders is the new guy. Miles Sanders is only averaging 3.6 yards per carry. When you have a gap in efficiency like that, I'm definitely thinking of getting Hubbard just to see what comes of it, right? It's the Jaylen Warren, Najee Harris situation, Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert, that type of thing. Something's brewing. It hasn't really materialized yet, but we're curious. Tutu Atwell, that value is just skyrocketing, but all things considered, he's only owned in 57% of leagues right now. Definitely a plug and play, definitely somebody we're probably not going to be looking at a couple of weeks down the road if Cooper Kupp does come back, say around week 5 or 6. But still a decent price for him, right? Jayden Reed against the New Orleans Saints, 20% ownership. He had a 2-touchdown game in week 2 against the Falcons secondary. If Christian Watson is out or even limited, which seems pretty likely, go after someone whose impressive preseason has led to 13 targets over the course of the first 2 games. If Christian Watson is in, and by some stretch of the imagination, we're told he is 100%, I don't think Jayden Reed is as appealing, but also we have to look at Aaron Jones because this team has been relatively run-heavy. Yes, Jordan Love has 6 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, but if you watch the film, even if you just look at the overall usage on this team, they are leaning on the run more than they have in the last decade because it's a new quarterback. It's been Aaron Rodgers, and more Aaron Rodgers over the course of the last decade. Even with A.J. Dillon struggling against the Falcons, they leaned on the run a little more than we expected. Kendre Miller, I actually want to check on here, and then I'll get to your questions. I see Alex and Johnny are in the chat. Thank you guys so much for joining the stream today. We'll get to your situations and help you out as much as possible. Kendre Miller, this is a bargain. 16.5% ownership. Obviously, Jamal Williams out. We don't have Alvin Kamara for 1 week. This is the definition of a plug and play. I am not touching Kendre Miller after this week unless something happens with the Alvin Kamara situation, unless something happens with Jamal Williams. Really not interested in him outside of this week. Kind of an emergency option, but one that really just fell into our lap with Jamal Williams going down. So keep that in mind. Again, folks, thank you so much for joining this stream. Let's get to the questions that you have. Alex and Johnny, good to see you in here. Alex says, how goes it? It's going good, my man. 0-2, 12-man, 3-flex PPR. I traded Bijan Robinson for Travis Etienne and James Cook. Best running back outside of Bijan was Sanders. Now need to know if I would start Sanders over Terry, Addison, and London in the flex spot. Okay, so you're rolling with Terry, Addison, and London at the moment. Obviously, Miles Sanders back there, we just talked about him being outproduced by Chuba Hubbard, but if we look at a snaps perspective, that's why I've got Sleeper open here. Let's do a little deep dive for you, Alex. Don't really care. This is half-point PPR, so ignore the points, but the principle stands the same. So Chuba Hubbard consistently digging in. I mean, not too much, right? 37% is nothing crazy. But the thing we do like with him is the efficiency. Super small sample size. Was a non-factor against New Orleans, and that's because they were down from the get-go. Miles Sanders, not seeing a whole lot of action on the ground. I mean, with a veteran like Andy Dalton, especially considering that this team is a 5.5-point underdog, we're probably going to see a lot of throwing. But this is promising. 11 targets for Miles Sanders. Now, of course, the question is, are we going to replace Terry McLaurin, Drake London, or Jordan Addison? I'll tell you right now, Alex, we're not messing with Jordan Addison against that Chargers secondary. I really do think, even if they want to double down and emphasize a ton of coverage on Justin Jefferson, there is money to be made this week with Jordan Addison. I'm not sure what his line is on Underdog right now for over-under, but Jordan Addison honestly might have one of the best matchups in the entire league. That projected total points scored is, I believe, around 50, 51 between the Vikings and Chargers. I mean, two 0-2 teams with horrible defenses, great offenses. That has all the makings of being an arms race, a shootout, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to keep Jordan Addison there. So now it's Terry McLaurin or Drake London. I'm typically taking pass catchers over a running back, but we'll just take a quick look. I want to see, because Sam Howell has looked calm, cool, and collected. I'm pretty concerned with the matchup against the Bills this week. And folks, this is what I do if it's your first time here. I'm not really going to try and pick something off the top of my head unless I've done a lot of research on it already. This specific situation, I'll be honest, I haven't been looking too much at the Commanders because I haven't seen a whole lot of appealing options. A pretty spread out attack. Jahan Dotson, Logan Thomas, Curtis Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. It's a subtle four-headed monster, not because they're all super productive, but because Sam Howell really hasn't picked a favorite yet. Now, Terry McLaurin does have a receiving touchdown along with Logan Thomas and Brian Robinson Jr., who has been getting a ton of volume. Not the biggest fan of Terry against the Bills, in all honesty. And then Drake London had the bounce back, right? He goes against the Detroit secondary that hasn't been great. We're seeing more usage with him. I'm okay with Drake London. I don't think he's going to be a phenomenal option this week. A lot of people had me completely on me for saying that he was outside of my top 20. I think Drake London's fine this week. I think that Jordan Addison has a phenomenal matchup against the Chargers this week. Terry, yeah, and we had the turf toe injury as well, Alex. That's a good point. I don't think it's lingering too much anymore. He has been getting more, I believe he got more snaps this week. The snap count, or the snap limit, if you will, was really only for that first week. Actually played less against Denver. It's just a spread out attack, right? This is not super appealing to me. And then let's look at the fact that he's facing a Bills team who, over the course of the last 2 years, has been allowing less than 18 points per game. Really not excited about that matchup at all. If we are going to go in and replace anybody with Miles Sanders, I think it's Terry. London's usage was back up. Desmond Ridder didn't have a phenomenal game against the Packers. He did enough. But I think that slowly but surely Arthur Smith is trusting him a little bit more with the ball. Obviously, Bijan Robinson isn't just a ground and pound guy. He's a pass catcher. So they went out and got somebody who's going to get Ridder more involved. I think the plan is to let him throw the ball about 30 times a game, at least. And that's all somebody like Drake London needs, considering that Kyle Pitts hasn't been too productive. He's been pretty injury prone. But I do think that London is in a way better spot than Scary Terry because volume competition. Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, who I really wasn't expecting this year, and Jahan Dotson are all legitimate volume threats. And then we look at the fact that we also have somebody in Brian Robinson Jr., not so much of a target threat, but they're going ground and pound with this guy. He's got half their touchdowns. 2 on the ground and 1 through the air. There's a lot more volume competition, I would argue, and just a more even distribution of touches in Washington than there is in Atlanta. Tyler Algier, I think it's going to start to be dialed back. He was a huge sell-high candidate. So sorry, that's a very long-winded answer, Alex. I'm rolling with Addison in that wonderful matchup against the Chargers. I'm taking Drake London this week. If I'm replacing anybody, it's Terry. But if you wanted to roll with that 3, that's fine. But if you are to replace anybody with Miles Sanders, I am rolling with Terry. Johnny says, 0-2 PPR. What's the best option for a flex? Stack Myers and Adams or keep Williams as my flex? I'm assuming we're thinking Mike Williams here. If you can clarify that for me, Johnny. But Mike Williams against the Vikings, I'm almost just as intrigued as I would be with Jordan Addison against the Chargers. That game is going to see a lot of points. A lot of points. Jacoby Myers coming off of that nasty hit. I'm not the biggest fan of stacking wide receivers. We can look. Appreciate you guys dropping in. I might be streaming tonight. I'm actually going glow-in-the-dark golfing for a work event, which would be pretty cool. So leaving for that in a couple of hours. If I don't stream tonight, I will definitely see you ahead of kickoff tomorrow. I will probably be on around 10 o'clock, and then I'll have to get off around 11:30. So if you guys haven't noticed through the first couple of weeks of this season, it's my main priority to crank out videos well ahead of time, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday range, sometimes even Monday, so that you have time in your busy schedules to go in, watch, and get the information you need. And then as the time starts ticking down, and we've got less than 24 hours ahead of kickoff on Sunday, I'm going to go live so I can answer any lingering questions you have, especially considering it feels like every running back on earth is coming down with injury right now. I'm trying to get you immediate answers in the last 48 to 24 hours. So that's why you're seeing me go live more so later in the week. I'm prioritizing that. The pre-produced content that you can consume throughout the week and snack on, that's going to be early in the week. It's a tentative schedule just to give you an idea of when to expect things to come out. I mean, Jacoby Myers obviously had that phenomenal first week. And then you're asking, maybe we roll with a Mike Williams. I mean, this is a throw-heavy offense. And against the Vikings, you're going to want just that, right? You are going to want to throw the ball a ton. This is one of the worst defenses in the league. And honestly, it's going to be back and forth between 2 of the worst defenses in the entire league. Mike Williams is comfortably that number 2 option. I was very interested to see how involved Joshua Palmer was going to be, because if we look at the target usage from last year, he actually led this team in targets. Only because of his durability. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen played 4 full games together. So it wasn't the most impressive thing in the world. And we're not going to get last year. I will get you an answer, Johnny. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Okay, so why am I being a boomer right now? Okay. Leader in targets, but if we look at a targets per game perspective, I mean 89 through 10, Keenan Allen was getting about 9 targets per game. Joshua Palmer led the entire team in targets just because of his durability. He played in 16 games. So I was really curious to see, could he maybe take over the wide receiver 2 spot? But your traditional down the field, bigger target, Mike Williams, is prevailing right now. It looks like a 1-2 race. So you're asking me Myers or Williams? Not the biggest fan of those stacks, like I said before. And if we look at the matchups for week 3, I don't love it against the Steelers in that secondary. They've played some pretty ugly games so far. You've got the occasional anomaly where you have San Francisco just thriving. Yes, Mike Williams been plugging and playing the wrong guys each week. Had Pierce playing, Swift and Monty on my bench. I mean, holy crap. Are we really going to sit here and act like DeAndre Swift is doing anything close to something predictable right now? First week, 2 touches, 1.3 points, I believe. Second week, 25% of snaps. Second week, 25 points. So from 25% of snaps to 25 points. Yeah, holy crap. I mean, who's predicting that? Third week, I think he's the main guy, but I really just want to sit back and see because I thought Kenneth Gainwell, after getting the most touches of anybody on the ground in the Super Bowl, was going to have a greater role. So this is for Johnny. What's the best option for a flex? Stack Myers with Adams or keep Williams as my flex? Johnny, I think we're rolling with Williams against that very weak Vikings secondary. Like I said, should be a shootout. I don't love wide receiver stacks in general. We do have somebody in Devontae Adams who's consistently, and this rolled into this year so far, small sample size of course, had at least a 30% target share. Not to mention that Josh Jacobs is going to try and get going at some point. He's had a horrible start. But I don't love wide receiver stacks, especially with somebody who's as target dominant as Devontae Adams. Mike Williams, in that matchup, he seems to be the definitive number 2 from a target perspective. I'm going to go with him. I'm rolling with Mike Williams as your flex, and that's my reason why. If you don't agree with it, completely fine. That's my 2 cents. I would stay there. Baby Santa, good to see you in here. Yo, what's up, man? Trade question. Would you trade away Kyren Williams and Jaylen Warren for DK Metcalf and Garrett Wilson? I have Saquon, so hurt obviously, Tony Pollard, James Cook, and James Conner plus Kupp, Mike Williams, and Chris Godwin. Kyren Williams and Jaylen Warren, DK Metcalf, and Garrett Wilson. Obviously, Cam Akers gone. I don't think that was really going to have a huge factor anyway because he was so horrible. When I saw that stat line in week 1 of 22 rushes for 29 yards, I was pretty shocked. I'm gonna be frank with you. I mean, that's next level stuff, especially considering over the course of the last 3 games last year, Cam Akers had over 100 yards. I mean, it seemed like he had his job back and then some. Kyren Williams and Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren is somebody that people are going to be buying low on. I wouldn't really suggest selling low, but if you can go out and get DK Metcalf and Garrett Wilson, I'm definitely doing that because Garrett Wilson, for one, is a buy low. Second, with Garrett Wilson, here's why he's a buy low. One of 2 things is going to happen, I'm assuming. The Jets went out and invested pretty heavily. They threw a boatload of picks at Green Bay for a 39-year-old quarterback. The expectation was better performance under center. I highly doubt that for 16 games in about 3.5 quarters, they just roll with Zach Wilson. Because the whole reason they went out and got Aaron Rodgers was because they figured that Zach Wilson wasn't the answer, right? So Garrett Wilson is a good buy low option right now because one of 2 things is going to happen. Zach Wilson, for the last 5 months, that whole narrative that was being painted that he was growing and thriving and becoming a better quarterback under Aaron Rodgers, that's either going to be true and we're going to see that come into fruition on the field, or the Jets are going to go sign Carson Wentz. The Jets are going to go out and get some random veteran quarterback who could be the answer, right? That's what's going to happen. They're going to go sign a backup. They're going to go grab somebody who is more proven than Zach Wilson, which is a wide pool of people. But Baby Santa, I really do believe that there's higher production on the way for Garrett Wilson. The guy had 2 catches out of 8 targets for over 80 yards and a touchdown. I mean, he could explode if he had competent quarterback play. He had 1,100 yards with Zach Wilson last year, primarily. They're going to go out and get somebody if Zach Wilson doesn't play better. Moral of the story, the value should go up. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 1 with Geno Smith, who was shoving him the ball a ton of times last year. Yes, there's just JSN and Tyler Lockett. I would argue that's not too much of an issue because Tyler Lockett is well over 30 years old. Yes, he's preserved his body. I think he'll last in the league for at least a couple more years. But DK is the number 1. Garrett Wilson is the number 1. And better quarterback play should be expected, whether it's bought or Zach Wilson just changes. I think the first option is a lot more likely. You've got a great backfield, so you're getting rid of those depth pieces. Yeah, if you can get DK Metcalf and Garrett Wilson for Kyren Williams and Jaylen Warren, I like it a lot because Kyren Williams really hasn't been all that efficient. He's just gotten the ball a ton. He's been one of many unsung heroes on that Rams offense. Yes, Baby Santa, if you can go out and get that deal done, you go and do it. Jonathan Foster, good to see you in here, man. Rashee Rice or Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds, I believe, I just want to make sure on this one. I believe he is questionable. So that should answer your question partially there. We've kind of got to keep an eye. I've been monitoring that one. Atlanta's secondary, man, I'm not a big fan of that. Groin injury, questionable. Heading into the weekend, dealing with it all week, and was limited at practice because of it. If he's ruled out ahead of kickoff on Sunday, Khalif Raymond and Marvin Jones Jr. will be in the line. That's right, Marvin Jones Jr. came back to Detroit. Folks, if you're just stopping in, leave a like, subscribe if you have not already, and ask me any fantasy questions you possibly have, okay? Anything at all, that's what I'm here for. Rashee Rice or Josh Reynolds, right? We saw Rashee Rice get used a decent amount in week 1. The question we have to ask ourselves with the Chiefs passing game is how quickly is this game going to be over? The Bears are going through literally everything and more. They had their defensive coordinator resign for things I'm not even going to mention on this stream. You can go look that up. They've had Justin Fields criticizing the coaching staff and then kind of backing down from the claim. $100,000 worth of equipment was stolen. They're 0-2. Everyone's questioning the narrative that they were going to come back and maybe challenge for the North. I mean, this is wide open, right? I like Rashee Rice. My only thing is he hasn't had a great impact, and in all honesty, Kadarius Toney had a pretty good week too. Travis Kelce's in there, obviously. Noah Gray hasn't looked bad. Sky Moore broke out a little bit. Justin Watson looks awesome. He's been the big play guy. They're still MVS. There's a lot of target competition, more so just because there's not a definitive number one outside of Travis Kelce. So Rashee Rice, I'm not too confident on. Other side of the coin, Josh Reynolds has a really tough matchup against Atlanta. I'm probably going Josh Reynolds unless he has any type of snap count. Rashee Rice is against a Bears team that honestly will give up a touchdown to whoever wants it. But the problem with that game is the Bears are 12.5-point underdogs last time I checked. As soon as the doors get blown off that thing, it's going to be bombs away for somebody like Isaiah Pacheco if he plays, Jerick McKinnon, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The running backs are going to get plenty of usage in what has all the makings of being a blowout. And I wholeheartedly mean that. So to answer your question, Jonathan, I'm going Josh Reynolds unless we see a snap count limit. It's not the best matchup. Otherwise, I'll go Rashee Rice. Standard scoring. We want somebody who's getting more targets. Rashee Rice, only 7 targets through a couple of games. We saw what Josh Reynolds did last game. I think as long as he plays, that's going to warrant some targets. You've got a veteran quarterback in Jared Goff. Now, the Falcons have looked good so far, but keep in mind they have played against Bryce Young and Jordan Love, a pair of first-year starters. Josh Reynolds has way more volume. I'm taking him even with the tough matchup as long as he's not on a significant snap count limit. In standard scoring, we want volume. That's exactly what we're getting. 146 yards. And really, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown or Josh Reynolds. Sam Laporta is sneaky. He's now owned in about half of leagues across all platforms. But outside of that, we don't have much. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he'll be more involved on the ground with David Montgomery out if we look at that end of the context. Whereas we don't really know who to look for here outside of Travis Kelce. And, he missed one game. So he'll be the targets leader by the end of this week, I'm pretty sure. But like Noah Gray's looked all right. Justin Watson has had a couple of big plays. Sky Moore broke out. Kind of. Marquez Valdes-Scantling will always be that big target down the field. You'll typically see him around 20 yards per reception. He's at 15 right now. Kadarius Toney is technically the wide receiver one on this team if you look at the depth chart. But he had the drop issues in week 1. I'm much more confident in Josh Reynolds, even with the tough matchup. Alex says, appreciate it, no problem. Jacob Ander, good to see you in here. 12-team PPR redraft. I lost Nick Chubb last week. I am sorry, my man. I lost Chubb and Saquon in one of my leagues. Obviously, Saquon's going to be back soon, but Nick Chubb, that might have been a career-ending injury. I hope he's back. If this is a keeper, obviously keep him. Just look for news in the next few weeks. Hopefully, we'll have a more definitive answer by the end of the season. 0-2 and looking to shake things up. I got an offer where I give up Tua Tagovailoa, Zay Flowers, and Terry McLaurin, and I get Deshaun Watson, Jalen Waddle, and Dameon Pierce. Thoughts? This is PPR. We'll take it straight up. Tua to Deshaun Watson. I'll be transparent with you, Jacob. You're seeing a significant downtick in production at the quarterback position. Deshaun Watson has a 55% completion percentage. Just threw that in a video earlier this week. Really not a great situation. Now, it won't be as run-heavy of a scheme when you're missing somebody like Nick Chubb, but Jerome Ford still looked awesome. He had 16 rushes for over 100 yards against a pretty tough Steelers front. Okay, so significant downtick in production. We're going to need these next 2 picks to outperform his next 2 picks by a decent amount. Zay Flowers to Jalen Waddle. That's a decent gap. Jalen Waddle was a top 10 wide receiver last year. Is dealing with a concussion. I believe he's still questionable. If we look at him, I mean, we're going to be looking long-term with trades like this, right? Jalen Waddle's awesome. It would even be better if you could somehow get a stack with Tua and Waddle, right? You're giving up Tua, so you lose that opportunity. Jalen Waddle, not too many targets because Tyreek Hill has just been dominating in that category. Not worried at all. This is somebody who's a down-the-field target. After his first year, the coaching staff said, you will never have a stat line like that again, where I believe he had like 9.8. 5 minutes ago, Waddle's out. I mean, we're still looking at, yeah. Wow. Okay. This is a typo, by the way. Week 4 game against the Broncos. We found a typo. Long term, I love Jalen Waddle a lot more than Zay Flowers, although Zay Flowers does look like he's going to be a definitive option up there in terms of usage alongside Mark Andrews. Terry McLaurin, Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce, not much of a pass catcher. We've seen a little bit more the first couple of weeks. So we'll look here. Just seeing if we have any competition with Singletary. That's the wrong Pierce, buddy. 45%, 45%, 3 targets. I mean, this is a team that just throws the ball a lot also in the first couple of weeks. I was not expecting to see over 350 yards through the air from CJ Stroud. That was not on my bingo card. I think even with the situation with Terry McLaurin, where we talked about him having a lot of volume competition with guys like Curtis Samuel, with guys like Logan Thomas, with guys like Jahan Dotson, I still think it's an upgrade from somebody like Dameon Pierce, Jacob, because it's PPR and because Terry McLaurin, and I'm not saying he's going to do it again, has had a 1,000-yard season over the course of the last 3 years. We've got a veteran who knows this offense, who's been through a few different quarterbacks, obviously Carson Wentz being one of the most recent. I think you're giving up too much here. Tua down to Deshaun Watson is a heck of a drop. Zay Flowers to Jalen Waddle is awesome. Terry McLaurin to Dameon Pierce, you're losing value. Now, if you wanted to go out and get somebody like Jalen Waddle, I could see Flowers and McLaurin for him. You have Zay Flowers, somebody who's averaging well into the double digits per game. You're taking a bit of a risk trying to get this deal done with Terry McLaurin right now because his value is so low, but maybe they're trying to buy low. Maybe from their perspective, they're going to get some depth at the wide receiver position. I'm not sure what this person's situation is, Jacob, but maybe they're going to try and spread out and get somebody like Zay Flowers who's consistent, and they're going to buy low on someone who they know has had a 1,000-yard season each of the last 3 years in McLaurin. I would try and do Flowers and McLaurin for Waddle. I think that's fair for both sides if they're looking for depth, and then you get the Tua and Waddle stack. But yeah, I would not downgrade to Deshaun Watson. I understand it's going to be more of a throw-heavy scheme. He just hasn't looked good. And then you're losing some value going from McLaurin to Pierce. I'd rather get an ascension in value and go out and get somebody like Jalen Waddle, who you can stack with Tua. Obviously, we're taking a huge risk in terms, not a huge risk, but a decent risk in terms of injury. We've got somebody in Tua who had a couple of scary injuries last year. Knock on wood. Knock on frickin' wood. He's been fine so far this year. And then Waddle is out with a concussion in week 3. But I think the Tua Waddle stack would be great, and I think Zay Flowers and Terry McLaurin is a decent asking price. Okay. And then Johnny, yep, we covered you on Mike Williams. Jacob says, my current starting lineup, perfect, is Tua, Joe Mixon, Javonte Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, who I believe is also questionable, Evan Ingram, and Zay as your flex. Right, so you're not even giving up DeAndre Hopkins or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a top 10 wide receiver last year. DeAndre Hopkins has the potential to be top 15, top 20 because outside of Treylon Burks, he really doesn't have a whole lot of volume competition, and Derrick Henry's been pretty inefficient. So, Jacob, I say let's ship off Terry McLaurin and Zay Flowers and go and get Jalen Waddle. For those of you listening right now or watching, go in the comments section. Is that a fair trade? Terry McLaurin and Zay Flowers for Jalen Waddle. Keep in mind, Jacob would be getting a stack with Tua and Waddle here. He's 0-2, looking to make a splash, get some elite talent. What do we think? All right, Chasers 545. Do you like Joshua Kelly or Jordan Addison at flex? No PPR. Thank you for that context, man. Looking at Austin Eckler's situation pretty closely, obviously. He is out. Against Minnesota, who is the favorite? This has to be a toss-up, right? I'm assuming it just comes down to whoever's hosting. And it's the Vikings. So the Vikings get a 1 point favorite. rule of thumb, it's about 1 now with the way Vegas has been setting things up. 1 point favorite for whoever's hosting. Joshua Kelly or Jordan Addison at flex, no PPR. I mean, Joshua Kelly in general has been getting a decent amount of volume. He didn't do a ton last week. Still relatively efficient, 13 touches. Austin Eckler out. We want to go more for volume. My problem with going with Joshua Kelly chasers is just because Jordan Addison has such an amazing matchup too. We can look at yards per carry allowed. Folks, if you're just dropping in, we are answering all of your fantasy football questions. I'll run over the injuries again in a moment, or you can just look at the ticker at the bottom of the screen. I have them all there. Any fantasy football related questions you have ahead of tomorrow, feel free to ask and feel free to like and subscribe if we're helping you out on this fine Saturday afternoon. That is not what I was looking for. Yeah, so Minnesota, middle of the pack, right? In terms of how many rushing yards per game or per carry they're allowing. Jordan Addison has been, I mean, honestly phenomenal. He is clearly the wide receiver too, now ahead of KJ Osborne. I don't really have any questions about that. Capitalizing on pretty much every opportunity, a pair of touchdowns so far. We're kind of seeing the same situation we saw in Justin Jefferson's rookie year, where Adam Thielen had an uptick in touchdowns because there was so much attention on him. I think I'm going to go with Jordan Addison, man. Chasers, we've got a phenomenal matchup against a pretty horrible Chargers secondary. Again, I've said this before. This is going to be an arms race. I think I'm going Jordan Addison here. It's not PPR, but I think I'm still going to go with him. Because we can't really sit here and guarantee that the Chargers are going to be in a position, even with a few minutes to go, to run the ball a ton. I'd say it's a pretty pass-heavy attack on both ends. These are two teams who were top 10 in the league in pass volume last year. The Vikings are going to be even more than that now that it doesn't seem like they have a great option at running back. Yes, they went out and got Cam Akers. Let's not sit here, fool ourselves, and act like that's going to move mountains. Alexander Mattison has been pretty awful. Small sample size, so we'll see. Point being, there's going to be an emphasis in the pass for them, and I don't see the Chargers getting out so far ahead, considering both of these teams lack a lot on defense to feel comfortable, right? I don't see teams going up 14 with 10 minutes to go in the game and going, let's just sit on it. Let's just try and run the clock down. Because, the place you're going to hit both of these teams where it hurts is in the passing game. Chasers, I'm going Jordan Addison based on that. Baby Santa says, appreciate you. No problem, man. Brian, my man. Brian, shout out to you. I'm giving Brian a shout out right now. Folks, if you did not know this already, I drafted the worst fantasy football team in history. Literally a bunch of backups, and then I took James Cook in the 4th round. 12 team standard PPR, and I'm trying to rebuild them. I won in week 1 by some miracle. And then I played Brian Pereira, one of my first subscribers on here, longtime supporter, well over a year, I think. And we got to give Brian his flowers, man. Week 2, he just got me. And the difference was me benching Puka Nacua because he was questionable and facing San Francisco. He got 30. Brian got me, man. My team's looking all right now. Brock Purdy, James Cook, Raheem Mostert. Sold Mostert off. I actually have Mark Andrews now. I got burned there. Allen Robinson, it came down to him on Monday night. So shout out to you, Brian. Just wanted to say that before I answer any of your questions. Good win this week, man. You shut me up for a little bit. All right, so Brian says, interesting what you are saying about stacks. I've been trying to facilitate a trade in acquiring Josh Jacobs in my family league. I have Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver 1 and 2. That is awesome, but didn't know if a good strat would be having all 3 of them playing together. Jacobs, Myers, and Adams. Yeah, I mean, Brian, we have 2 of 3 possibly being top 5 at their position. I mean, Devontae Adams, year in and year out for a bit, has been top 5 at his position. We don't know how the chemistry is going to be with him and Jimmy Garoppolo, especially considering that Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Myers are from the same system in New Orleans. Devontae Adams still looks like he'll be all right. And then you have Josh Jacobs. Brian, we need those guys to have great weeks more times than not. And I think it's really tough when they're all on the same team. If Devontae Adams goes off and has a monster game, like 10 receptions out of 15 targets for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, which we've seen a few times, we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for Jakobi Meyers? What does that mean for Josh Jacobs? Now, if Davante Adams goes off, Brian, and the Raiders just win by a ton, Josh Jacobs is going to get some touches because when you're up at least a couple of possessions or there's not much time left in the game, you're going to try and chew the clock down. There are scenarios out there statistically where Davante Adams blows up, has a great game, and then Josh Jacobs gets used down the stretch. My worry is, can all three of these guys routinely have a good week together? Or are you going to be playing the game where you go, Davante showed up for me this week, but Josh Jacobs didn't even touch the ball? We also have to understand, Brian, what I just said about game script. The Raiders win a game. Let's say they're up 24-14 in the fourth quarter. Guess what? They're going to go more run heavy. Statistically, the teams are doing that. They're going to go more run heavy down the stretch to try and clock it, right? We've seen that. Trend-wise, it happens. That's why the majority of top 10 running backs year in and year out in fantasy PPR, and you can look this up, are on playoff teams. Okay? So let's say they're up 24-14, and Davante Adams has a great day. Now all of a sudden, Josh Jacobs gets the ball down the stretch. Guess who gets left out? Jakobi Meyers. They're getting blown out. Let's say the Raiders are down 24-0 after a quarter and a half, which, judging by how their defense has looked the last couple of years, is very possible. Well, all of a sudden, you have to go throw heavy. So unless Josh Jacobs starts running a ton of routes and has a more extensive route tree than we thought, Josh Jacobs is not going to touch the ball. So now all of a sudden, we have a pass-heavy scheme and the running back gets left out. So, Brian, what you need to hope for is that this team, I've seen it done. I've seen Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler go off, but to do three? Not only are you playing the game of, are we going to get a balanced attack today? Is this team going to run the ball a ton? Is this team going to throw the ball a ton? Or do I have to stress out about the possibility of a blowout, which could happen at any point in this crazy league that we play fantasy with? Or do I want to get a more spread out attack? Do I want to maybe have Davante, and do I want to go and get a running back from somewhere else? Now, it wouldn't be the best to sell Josh Jacobs at his current value. It's pretty low. But my point is, not only are you worrying about competing interests with a running back and a wide receiver, is this team getting blown out? Are they blowing somebody out? Is it a run-heavy scheme? Is it not? Do we need them to be balanced? Not only are you worrying about that, but then you throw another guy into the mix in Jakobi Meyers, who is in the same system as Jimmy Garoppolo, and we start to ask ourselves, okay, but what if Foster Moreau has a decent game? What if one of these guys goes down? Maybe it's better because then you've got the starters getting things. I think there are a lot of different factors that just culminate in a giant headache by having three people on the same team. It's super rare. Now, the one exception I would say, Brian, is if you have a pass-catching back and then you have a quarterback as part of that stack. Now, what does that look like? That looks like Justin Herbert, a pass-catching back in Austin Eckler, who led all backs with 107 receptions, folks. And then maybe a Keenan Allen, who led this team from a targets per snap perspective. Basically, when he was on the field, he was getting the ball more often than anybody else. Does that make sense? I know there's a lot, but I like trifecta stacks if the quarterback is involved, because we know I've done the Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert stack, and I've won money from it. We know every play, either Justin Herbert or Austin Eckler is going to have a chance to score, and because Austin Eckler had 107 receptions last year, there's going to be a lot of scenarios where they both double up. But when we have Jakobi Meyers, Davante Adams already competing interests at the wide receiver position, and then we have different possibilities of game scripts by factoring in Josh Jacobs, if this team were to go run heavy because they're blowing somebody out, or vice versa, they abandon the run and go throw heavy, all of a sudden, we have mutually exclusive events. We don't have Josh Jacobs throwing to Davante Adams. The whole point of a stack for me is when guys can feed into each other's production. When we have a Kirk Cousins and a Jordan Addison, underrated stack, if he starts feeding Jordan Addison and we're going up against a horrible secondary, we're feeling pretty good. But for Josh Jacobs, Jakobi Meyers, and Davante Adams to all be doing well at the same time, we need a great matchup across the board against a team that can't stop the run, can't stop the pass, the offense is firing on all cylinders, and Brian, we need it to be a close game. We need the other team to do phenomenal. We need a Chargers and Vikings matchup every single week where we're getting a shootout. Because if it's not a close game, and you're winning by a ton, you're going to run the ball a lot. There goes the usage for Meyers and Adams. If it's not a close game and you're getting blown out, you're going to throw the ball a lot. There goes Jacobs' usage, and all of a sudden you're using Meyers and Adams. Hope that makes sense. Jonathan Foster says, thank you. No problem, my man. Anime Del Real is in here. Good to see you. I have Henry and Cook with Robinson on my bench. Is it worth it to swap him with someone because he popped off last week? Anime, is this Bijan Robinson or Brian Robinson Jr.? That's a valid question now because Brian Robinson Jr. has been going off. If it's Bijan Robinson, we're plugging him in, likely for Derrick Henry, because Derrick Henry doesn't have a whole lot of pass catching involvement and hasn't been too efficient and is 30. Meanwhile, James Cook is on a team that should win about 11 or 12 games this year and has a pretty nice matchup against the Commanders. So run heavy scheme for him, game script wise, but also he's just super efficient. James Cook is averaging over 5.5 yards per carry. If it's Brian Robinson Jr. against the Bills, I think it might be up, right? I mean, when we look at who the Commanders have played so far, we can look at Brian Robinson Jr. If you're to sub him out for someone, it might be Derrick Henry. And I know it seems super weird to say. It's not Jr. I'm sorry, it's just Brian Robinson. No, it's Brian Robinson Jr. Arizona and Denver. I mean, possibly the number 1 overall pick this year. And a team that is just in shambles, had a coaching change, still figuring things out. That's what Brian Robinson has faced so far. And really, he hasn't been that efficient. He's been pretty volume reliant. 20 touches here, 20 touches here. 20 touches for 13 fantasy points is not good. And he got saved by a touchdown. So Brian Robinson's had a lot of volume, but it's because they've been in these games. Buffalo is favored pretty heavily over the Commanders. 6 points, that's a decent line. Not a ton of scoring to be had. I think it's going to be a tough matchup, not only for Brian Robinson Jr. in general, Anime, but the Commanders are projected to lose by 6 points. And when you're playing a team that I honestly think mismatches you pretty well, like the Bills, you can see the Commanders are 2-0. They've played 2 easy teams, in my opinion. You're not going to be in a position to run the ball if you're working from behind. So I would probably just stick with Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. Yeah, Junior, it was him. Okay. He did pop off last week, but honestly, if there's anybody that you're going to try and trade, not sure how your team's doing right now, it would be Brian Robinson Jr. because, like we just said, he needs a lot of volume to produce. He needs touchdowns to produce. And even so, think about this. This guy got the ball 20 times, well above league average for a running back, especially in this day and age where there's so many split backfields. He got a touchdown, and he only had 13 points. This is half PPR, so it's going to be a little bit more than that, but he only had 1 reception. So he would have had 13.6. I'll do the math for you. Now, here it's fun, but we also have to keep in mind relying on a ton of volume. 2-0. So this team is in a position to run because they want to run the clock down, keep it going. You don't want to sling the ball all around and then you pause the clock and give a team a chance to come back. And there is a significant jump from playing teams like the Cardinals and the Broncos to playing somebody like the Bills. Now, his projection went up, but that's strictly because of what we've seen here. I'm not saying he's going to do bad. I'm just saying he relies on volume, 20 touches a game. He relies on touchdowns. He's not very efficient. And these have been 2 wins for the Commanders. I don't see them winning here, and neither does Vegas. So I would stick with Derrick Henry and James Cook. All right. Eden, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Should I trade Kyle Pitts and Breece Hall for Hunter Henry and either Dameon Pierce or Devontae Williams? All 3? Pierce and Williams, I'm assuming. Kyle Pitts, I don't mind trading. You're not going to get a ton for him. Still a great prospect, so you can kind of ride that wave. But when we look at Kyle Pitts' overall production, Drake London got the ball a decent amount. Still a run-heavy team, right? The Falcons run the ball more often than anybody else this year. My favorite stat from last year was they ran it second most behind the Bears. We'll dive in. Not a lot of volume here. Run-heavy team. I don't really know if you can make a great pitch for him other than the fact he's in a horrible tight end market. But to that I say, even in a horrible tight end market, he is number 30. Okay. Not the most excited about this. So you're trying to get Hunter Henry, who is probably at an all-time high in value right now because he's tight end 2. Exploded. Bill O'Brien loves to have Mac Jones throw the ball. Breece Hall, you'd also be selling low. But again, there's that usage question. He's hurt, coming off the ACL. They did pay Dalvin Cook a pretty decent sum. 10th highest paid running back this year. The snap count's low. He's complaining about his usage. I'm not sure that's a situation I want to be in. Now, I bring up value because I'm wondering if this is fair to the point where it's going to get accepted. I would try and get Hunter Henry. I would maybe even try and get somebody who we can rely on a little bit more, like a Tyler Higbee, who hasn't been great, so we'd be buying him low. But he did lead this team in targets last year when Cooper Kupp was out. Now, yes, there's Puka Nacua, there's Tutu Atwell, but he's a more consistent name who's known this system. Okay. Kyle Pitts and Breece Hall for Hunter Henry and Dameon Pierce / Javonte Williams. If you can get both, cool. If you're asking me between Dameon Pierce and Javonte, I'm probably going Javonte. He's getting more usage than Dameon Pierce. He's not doing great, and he's not very efficient. He does split with Samaje Perine, but at least 2 weeks into this Sean Payton offense, we are seeing a lot of dump-off passes to Javonte Williams. A ton. 9 targets. There's some extra usage there in PPR. If you can pull that trade-off for both, cool. If you have to choose between Pierce and Javonte, I'm probably choosing Javonte. Just because of the pass-catching upside, and Pierce is in for about 35% of snaps right now. Javonte is in for the mid-40s. I mean, the Broncos and the Texans are pretty bad, so I don't love going after running backs who are on bad teams, but at least you have someone with some pass-catching upside, and I would argue that the Texans are still a couple of steps behind a team like the Broncos. Amir Muhammad says, PPR. I think it's my first time seeing you in here, Amir, so welcome to the stream, man. PPR, who should I start at flex? Josh Kelly, Breece Hall, Tyler Algier, or Jerry Jeudy? Thank you for coming in and giving me the details too, folks. Anytime you have questions, please drop the league scoring format. Happy to help. Just need those details so I can help you out enough. All right. So Joshua Kelly, obviously Austin Eckler out. Breece Hall, Tyler Algier, or Jerry Jeudy. Now, we'll start with Tyler Algier. That one sticks out to me because we did see his usage go down a bit along with his efficiency. And by usage, I mainly just mean snap count. He actually got the ball almost as much. 18 times here to 16 here. Not too much of a pass catcher. It is no secret. The Falcons came out and said this, and I could probably scroll down enough to find it, but I'm not going to. Bijan Robinson was brought in to be the back. But he was also brought in to have more of a pass-catching presence than Tyler Algier. So that means we need Tyler Algier to either be extremely efficient, he has not been, small sample size, or we need Tyler Algier to score some touchdowns. We got it here. When we didn't, here's what happened. 16 touches, 4.8, yikes. Don't love Tyler Algier here at all. I really don't. There are also 3-point underdogs. It's essentially a neutral game considering it is in Detroit. But Bijan is getting more usage. This team runs the ball a lot. There should be a decent window of opportunity for him, but he's competing with one of the best backs in the NFL. And somebody who a year from now we may be calling the best overall running back in the NFL. So, Amir, we're going to go no on Tyler Algier. Jerry Jeudy's not in a great spot, but he was healthy for most of last year. Cortland Sutton's not jumping off the page by any means. This team has a great matchup against the Dolphins. And while Mims did have a couple of breakout plays, Jeudy's only played one game. He's got to compete with Sutton. It's mainly been Sutton, and then Jeudy would be on pace for 10 targets. Again, super small sample size. It's flex PPR. I usually take pass catchers. Breece Hall, we are avoiding. We are avoiding like the plague. I don't care, Amir, if Breece Hall gets 20 points this week. I don't want to risk it because he's out there on Twitter complaining about the amount of touches he's getting. He's questionable. He's coming off an ACL injury. And he's competing with somebody in Dalvin Cook, who is the 10th highest paid back in the league. Money talks. They're going to use him. Joshua Kelly, interesting scenario. Should the Chargers go up a ton of points? I do think that when you have the best receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson, you've got a better offense than most, so I'm actually taking the Vikings over the Chargers this week, but that's really a toss-up game. The line is -1. I don't think we can confidently say that Joshua Kelly gets a ton of usage against a Vikings secondary that's really a weakness, and in what should be an arms race. These two teams love to throw the ball. They love to. Okay? I typically go with my rule of thumb, and that is let's go in PPR scenarios with a wide receiver. I'm leaning harder into that this week with Jerry Jeudy because he's going up against such a weak secondary in the Dolphins. If we're going to take one of those backs, it's probably Joshua Kelly. Jeudy or Kelly. Algier is sharing a backfield with Bijan Robinson and is starting to see a downtick in usage and efficiency. Breece Hall's questionable, has usage issues right now. He's not getting a lot of touches, and he's coming off an ACL injury. Let's go with Jeudy and then Kelly in that order. If you want to take Kelly, can't be mad at you. He's been okay so far. Greg Sheerankin, good to see you in here. I think it's the first time I've seen you in here, Greg, so welcome to the stream. Need one in PPR, DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, Elijah Moore. DeAndre Hopkins, if healthy, I like a decent amount. We're just going to look at game script here real quick. -3.5. So the Browns are favored. And then Hollywood Brown, obviously. 13-point dogs. 13-point dogs. I thought the Chiefs-Bears game was bad. Holy cow. And folks, if you're just joining, we're doing injury updates. I'll cycle through those again pretty soon. But more importantly, I am answering your fantasy football-related questions ahead of tomorrow. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. But please, the most important part, ask me any questions you got. Marquise Brown and Zach Ertz are up there in targets. There's really not a definitive 3. I thought Trey McBride would play a bigger role, but nothing so far. Rondale Moore has been virtually invisible. This is a team that's going to throw the ball a decent amount. All things considered, they haven't yet. Now, the Cardinals have not looked great by any means. This is a team that is definitely in contention to be the number 1 overall pick in 2024. Yet, it's almost a 50-50 split between passing and rushing. So really, leaning into James Conner more than I thought, and why wouldn't you? Pretty efficient. Joshua Dobbs is a little more mobile than we thought. Marquise Brown's a pretty decent option here, Greg. Elijah Moore has to compete with Amari Cooper, who, even when he was questionable last week, kind of dominated. Now, they are also favored, the Browns are, and I'm typically going to take a team that's losing and roll with their wide receiver. If DeAndre Hopkins is 110%, I'm rolling with him. Okay, Greg? If he's not, if he has a snap count limit, then I am probably looking at Marquise Brown in this really ugly matchup. Trayvon Diggs is down. That's their number 1 corner in Dallas. I would bet a lot of money on Arizona losing this game, just straight up money line. I wouldn't make much, but point being, it should be a pass-heavy scheme for Arizona if they want to stay in it. So I'm going D-Hop or Hollywood. Elijah Moore is in a pretty run-heavy scheme still. Deshaun Watson has not been great at all, and his team's favored. So I'll take one of the 2 underdogs in the Titans or the Cardinals. I'll roll with their wide receiver. D-Hop if he's 100%. If he's not, Hollywood Brown. Molo is in here. Good to see you. I went and got Chase and Gibbs and D-Hop and Cousins in a trade for Puka, Kamara, and Etienne. Did it mostly for Gibbs and Chase, but I feel like I gave a lot. Okay, so you got Jamar Chase, Jahmyr Gibbs, and DeAndre Hopkins, and Kirk Cousins in a trade for Puka, Alvin Kamara, and Etienne. Yeah, I think you did okay. Puka Nacua is in an offense that presumably is getting Cooper Kupp back pretty soon, so we know usage is going to go down there. Cooper Kupp demands a target share north of 30% pretty routinely. Alvin Kamara is coming back. Okay, Alvin Kamara is coming back, but he's going to have some volume competition, considering that Chris Olave was an 1,100-yard receiver last year, pretty much. Michael Thomas is healthy right now. Derek Carr likes to throw the ball a decent amount. Yes, it's a pass-catching back in Kamara, but we have so many unknowns when we talk about somebody who hasn't played football for a prolonged period of time and is missing time here. Now, the running backs have not been great in New Orleans. I think Kamara will rightfully take his spot back. Etienne's in a great spot because he's an RB1 on a team that's expected to win a lot of games. But you've got Jamar Chase and Jahmyr Gibbs. You bought 2 potentially top 10 position players in fantasy PPR low. I mean, you got Jamar Chase while Joe Burrow's looking hurt and the Bengals look horrible. But he's college teammates with one of the best quarterbacks in the league when healthy. It's a throw-heavy scheme. I really like Jamar Chase. Jahmyr Gibbs now has more of an opportunity to really cement his way into this backfield. He was picked number 12 overall. Anytime you have a first-round running back, you should expect usage. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be just fine. And with the pass-catching upside we've seen with Jahmyr Gibbs, I really think you got a lot. Small sample size, but there aren't a lot of running backs out there who are going to command 9 targets. Caught 7 of them, not a lot of yards. That's 10.39 points alone right there. Now we have more opportunity on the ground. He's being eased into this offense. We'll probably see him well over 50% of snaps. So you got Ja'Marr Chase was being drafted 2nd overall. Let's not act like because of an injury to the quarterback that shouldn't be too long-term. It's just a lingering calf injury for Joe Burrow. But all of a sudden, Ja'Marr Chase's value is just gone for the whole season. You got a guy in Jahmyr Gibbs who is now definitely taking a bigger role more soon because David Montgomery went down. You got DeAndre Hopkins, high risk, high reward, not much target competition outside of Treylon Burks. And you got Kirk Cousins. Underrated, typically top 10 to top 12 quarterback. You traded away Puka Nacua, who is going to lose value inevitably if Cooper Kupp comes back. Alvin Kamara, who we have a lot of unknowns around right now and isn't even playing football at the moment. Travis Etienne, there's some value there. Yeah, I think you got a pretty decent haul, Molo. We bought some players low in Jahmyr Gibbs and Ja'Marr Chase. Gibbs is inevitably going to get the ball more now. Ja'Marr Chase is just waiting for his quarterback to be healthy. DeAndre Hopkins just needs to be healthy, and Cousins is solid. I think you did well. Only Green says, just traded Derrick Henry and Evan Ingram for A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, and Kyle Pitts. I have ETN and B-Rob and CD, and gave... So I'm lacking wide receivers. Okay, let's see. Traded Derrick Henry and Evan Ingram for A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel. Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry hasn't been all that efficient. I hate to put somebody under a microscope 2 games in, but we got to go off the data that's at our disposal right now. Derrick Henry averaging about 3.6 yards per carry. Actually, a little more involved in the pass-catching game than in years past. Again, small sample size, right? Going to be 30 pretty soon. Went out and got A.J. Brown. We bought A.J. Brown low, which I absolutely love. Devonta Smith had a great week against the Vikings. A bunch of people are out there panicking right now. Oh my gosh, A.J. Brown didn't have a great game against the Vikings secondary. Clearly, we're not looking too good. Deebo Samuel. I like the pick more now because Brandon Ayuk has struggled with some injury issues through the first couple of weeks, okay? He played through the Week 2 game, and as a result, things got worse, and he ended up being out in Week 3. So you got Brown and Samuel, arguably 2 top 20s. Kyle Pitts, I mean, we're just waiting for anything with Pitts. Ingram has a lot of volume competition, I would argue more than Pitts, because he's got Zay Jones. He's got Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. You've got ETN. There was really no need to have Evan Ingram and ETN, so I like the trade in general. I really do. You got A.J. Brown, very low, and Deebo Samuel, who's in a more optimal position because of the injuries happening around him. Okay. Anime says, big brain, thanks, no problem. Amir says, start Kirk Cousins or Herbert this week. Either, man. I hate to be like that. I don't think you can go wrong. I would maybe lean Justin Herbert just because that team is probably going to lose. I think that the Vikings have a better offense, but then again, it's going to be such a close game. Maybe I go Kirk. Gosh, dude. I mean, those are 2 really good options this week. I hate not giving people answers, but I mean, it's such a coin toss. With Alvin Kamara out and the Chargers being underdogs, I am probably going Justin Herbert. But it is so close. I would expect 20 plus from both sides. I really would. I mean, slight underdogs, right? The line's at 54 points now. I mean, it just keeps going up. Nobody else is sniffing 50. I'd probably go Herbert because they are technically underdogs and there's no Austin Eckler. So Joshua Kelly's not as much of a pass-catching threat. Really can't go wrong with either. Yeah. I mean, that is close. I can also see Kirk Cousins. He's got the best receiver in the game and is going up against, just like Herbert, a debilitated secondary. KJW says, what's up, brother? Gabe Davis or Jacoby Myers? So Gabe Davis baited us this week. He has those breakout weeks every once in a while. Hope you're doing well, man. Gabe Davis is... I really don't like Gabe Davis. We'll start with that. Not very consistent. He'll bait us with a performance like this one. Big plays. This wasn't a whole lot of big plays, right? But last year, you get something like this where it's 3 catches for 171 and 2 touchdowns. The snap count has always been there. He's always involved, the definitive wide receiver 2 behind Diggs. But then you'll get a dry spout like this for like 5 weeks. He is going against the Commanders. I think James Cook has one of the best weeks of any running back this week. I ranked him at 10. I might even go higher than that now because this team is just favored to win by more and more against the Commanders, and you're going to go run heavy when you're up by a lot. Jakobi Meyers, back from the concussion, took a hard hit. Obviously has that chemistry with Jimmy Garoppolo. Pittsburgh is a tough matchup too. But at least this guy gets volume. Denver has a great secondary and he got volume. I'm probably rolling Jakobi Meyers. I'll give you these options, man. Jakobi Meyers definitely has a higher floor. Gabe Davis has a higher ceiling. He could snap and give us 30. He really could. But Jakobi Meyers was actually the favorite wide receiver in week 1. Devontae Adams is going to demand volume, and he's going to get it too. Off the concussion, as long as we don't see any snap count, I think I'm rolling Myers. We see more volume with him typically. All right, thanks KJW, appreciate it. Brian says, thanks for the shout out. No problem, bro. Any last minute advice on tight ends or streaming a tight end? I have Higbee, but unsure if I should ride the season with him or drop him for Njoku, Hurst, or Ferguson. Historically, I kind of like Ferguson in this situation because we've had guys like Jason Witten, who was legendary. We've had guys like Dalton Schultz, who had a decent role. Hayden Hurst is going to be interesting because now, obviously, we don't have Bryce Young this week, but if we're looking long-term, we will. That was his favorite target in week 1. It's likely going to be a throw-heavy scheme considering this team in Carolina is rebuilding and then some. Njoku may get leaned on a little bit more now that Nick Chubb is down. It's tough, Brian, because with tight ends, we're just looking around going, all right, if I don't have Mark Andrews, if I don't have Travis Kelce, if I don't have George Kittle, if he starts coming back and being used more, he had a nice start to week 3. If I don't have a select few options up at the top, I'm kind of in trouble. Higbee's going to have competition now, not only with Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell, but with Cooper Kupp when he comes back. I do think he'll have decent usage, and the Rams, still, despite the decently strong start, I don't see winning a ton of games this year. Maybe 7 or 8, if I had to project right now. Njoku, Hurst, and Ferguson. Hurst is in a pretty weird spot. Ferguson is on a Cowboys team that should probably run the ball more often than not at some points because they're just blowing teams out of the water. Njoku's on a team that has more pressure to throw the ball with Chubb out, but Jerome Ford could do okay. And now they went out and got Kareem Hunt too. So I'd say it's still a pretty run-heavy team considering Deshaun Watson hasn't played well. If we're not sticking with Higbee, I'm probably going... run heavy with Cleveland and Dallas because one team doesn't have the greatest quarterback. Another one blows teams out. Hurst is throw heavy. I'd go Higbee or Hurst based off usage. Hurst had the nice week 1, and he's on a team that's probably still going to throw the ball a lot. Dylan Fink, I think it's my first time seeing you in here. Welcome in, Dylan. Who did you start, or who would you start? Geno Smith against the Panthers, Stafford against the Bengals, Stroud against the Jags. Other options, but those are the bigger names. There's Mayfield, Russ, Pickett. Geno against the Panthers is not going to be the easiest because obviously that Carolina secondary has been pretty strong. If we look here, thanks for commenting, man. If we help you out today, leave a like and subscribe. Almost at 800 subs, by the way. Thank you all so much for the support. Super humbling. We were at like 6-0 something coming into the season. We've grown a lot the last few weeks, and it's not without all of you, so thank you so much. Tough secondary, right? They went out and got Von Bell. Got Dante Jackson already. Brian Burns out there. Oh, gosh. Xavier Woods. I don't love that matchup. Geno hasn't looked extremely sharp. Had a decent bounce-back performance against the Lions for sure. Did have to go to OT to produce a little more. Stafford against the Bengals. Obviously, they've given up Von Bell. They've also given up Jesse Bates. And Stroud against the Jags. Stroud's in a position to throw the ball a lot. Nico Collins has looked phenomenal. I don't see this team beating the Jags 1 time out of 10. Out of those 3, call me nuts. I'm probably going Stafford just because the Bengals have been pretty banged up in the secondary. And if Jake Browning is out there, I don't see the Bengals holding onto the ball for a lot of long drives. I'd go Stafford, then Stroud, then Geno against the Panthers because the Panthers secondary is pretty healthy now. All right, hope that helps. Folks, I think I'm going to call this one. I will be back on either tonight. If not tonight, definitely tomorrow morning ahead of the noon kickoff slate. You guys have been phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining the stream. Leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Armchair Fantasy Football, and hopefully we will see you in the next live stream or video.